February 8, 1945, Hunfeld, Ruhr Valley, Germany. Snow drifted in slow, ghost-like spirals over the ruined village of Hunfeld, settling on shattered roof beams and the blackened stones of homes that had once held laughter, warmth, and the quiet order of everyday life. The war had arrived months ago like a metal storm, sweeping through the valley with a cold, merciless hunger. Entire streets were flattened. Windows gaped open where glass had once caught the morning sun. Silence lingered in corners where families once gathered. And now, only the distant rumble of artillery reminded anyone that the world beyond still burned. High inside the rafters of a collapsed barn, a lone figure waited, still as carved wood. Matthias Kruger, former apprentice clockmaker, now hardened sniper of the Wehrmacht, lay pressed against splintered beams, his breath turning white in the freezing air. He had spent hours in that position, letting the cold slow his pulse and sharpen his focus. The far-off thunder of American armor vibrated faintly beneath him, passing through the wooden frame like a distant heartbeat. If you love stories like this, real courage, real history, then don't just watch, become part of it. Subscribe now to WWII Never Told German Files and stand with the people who keep this history alive. Every like, every share, every comment helps us honor those who live these moments and shows your support for the hard work that goes into bringing these forgotten stories back to life. So hit that subscribe button, join our community, and tell us where you're watching from. Together, we're not just remembering history, we're keeping it alive. Below, the road that cut through Hunfeld lay coated in ice, broken only by the dark boot prints of patrols that had passed earlier that morning. The Americans were drawing closer. Matthias knew their patterns. He knew their caution, their discipline, their small miscalculations born from overconfidence. He knew how they scanned the windows first and the roofs last. He knew when they were cold, when they were tired, and when their guard slipped just long enough for a ghost in the rafters to strike. Through the cracked lens of his Carabiner 98 K-scope, he watched figures appear at the edge of town. 5 American soldiers moved cautiously, rifles raised, bodies hunched against the cutting wind. And at their center walked a tall officer, thick coat pulled close, scarf whipping in the gusts. Captain William Carter of St. Louis, Missouri, though Matthias did not yet know his name, walked with a kind of deliberate confidence that marked him as someone important. Important targets died first. Matthias's gloved fingers slid toward the trigger, steady, practiced, almost ritualistic. He had done this 12 times since January. 12 officers, 12 men whose absence would slow American advances, disrupt command. Buy Germany a little more time, even if time itself was running out. The barn creaked softly as frost expanded in the beams. A crow perched on a broken crossbeam, watching, as if aware of what was about to happen. The wind dipped for a moment, carrying only the sharp scent of burning coal drifting from a ruined chimney somewhere deeper in the village. Matthias exhaled. His crosshairs settled perfectly on Carter's chest. But before the final pressure tightened, something shifted in his scope. A small object slipped out of the officer's coat pocket and fluttered toward the snow-covered road. Carter didn't notice at first. He stepped forward, then paused and bent down. Matthias adjusted the focus slightly, the image sharpening with a faint click. It was a photograph, a simple, worn photograph. Carter brushed the frost off with unhurried gentleness, lifting it closer to inspect the damage. And for the first time since climbing into the rafters, Matthias blinked. The young woman's face on the photograph was unmistakable. Bright smile, pale hair, a silver necklace identical to the one he had carved a year earlier in Dresden. He remembered shaping the tiny pendant with his own hands, smoothing its edges, engraving the initials MK on the back so quietly and carefully that his sister Lise joked he should have been a jeweler instead of clockmaker. It had been her birthday gift. The last one he had given her before the war swallowed everything. His vision wavered. He adjusted the scope again, desperate to be wrong. But the necklace glinted exactly where it should. The scratch on the corner, the faint bend in the clasp, the familiarity of every detail cut through him with the precision of a blade. This wasn't a duplicate. It was the same necklace, the same one his sister had worn the night she was evacuated from Dresden, days before the bombings. The same one she had promised never to take off. His heart hammered against his ribs. What was it doing in the hands of an American officer? His pulse stuttered between grief, disbelief, and something darker. Memories rose quickly. His mother rushing Elise onto an overcrowded evacuation train, promising safer towns ahead, promising they would reunite soon. But no letters ever came. No updates. No proof she had survived the mass fires, the chaos, the collapse of train lines. Until now, below him, unaware that death still hovered only inches away, Captain Carter slipped the photo gently back into his pocket. His men continued their scan of the ruined houses, their boots crunching on the ice. Matthias lowered the rifle. He didn't think. He simply couldn't. The scope drifted downward as his breathing turned rough and uneven. The cold no longer steadied him. The logical clarity he relied on fractured like thin ice underweight. His entire world narrowed to a single question. Why did an American officer carry a photograph of Elise? The answer could have been anything. Rescue, chance, guilt, tragedy. But none of it explained why he had treated the photo with such care, such familiarity, such tenderness. Matthias felt the weight of contradiction pulling him apart. Duty told him to take the shot. But the image of Elise's face in that man's hands paralyzed him. Before he could gather his thoughts, a faint sound rose from beneath the barn floor. A whisper, barely audible beneath the wind. A single word carried upward through the broken boards. Bruder? The rifle almost slipped from Matthias's grasp. He froze, listening. The wind pushed snow against the broken planks, but the whisper returned, strained, weak, but unmistakably real. Bruder? Matthias? He crawled silently toward the sound, lowering himself across the beams until a gap in the floor revealed the shadowed rubble below. Between broken boards and collapsed timbers, a figure moved, slight, trembling, half buried in debris. Pale hair, torn coat, a familiar fragile frame. His breath caught inside his chest. It was Elise, alive, her hand lifted weakly toward the road where the Americans were passing. Her lips parted, her voice nearly swallowed by the cold. They helped me, she whispered, each syllable fading. The officer, he saved me, don't hurt them. Matthias pressed a hand over his mouth, the weight of realization crashing into him with devastating force. The officer he had been seconds away from killing was the same man who had carried his sister out of danger. The same man who kept her photograph. The same man she now begged him not to harm. Outside, the patrol drew closer, boots stamping rhythmically in the snow. The air thickened with tension. The barn groaned under its own weight, threatening collapse. The rifle lay between Matthias's knees, forgotten. His sister's faint breathing echoed beneath him. And the Americans moved forward, unaware that their fate now rested not on a sniper shot, but on his conscience. Matthias swallowed hard. His mouth felt dry. His throat trembled. He stared at the officer, then at the rubble, then at the sky, where flakes drifted silently down, as if nature itself held its breath. And then Matthias opened his mouth. What he said next would never be written in any report, any diary, or any official archive. It would survive only in the memories of those who lived through the winter of 1945. Now the story turned toward a crossroads from which no one would return unchanged. The cold deepened as the American patrol moved deeper into the ruined heart of Hohenfeld. Their boots pressed into the snow with slow precision. The wind curled between broken walls and carried faint echoes that made every shadow feel alive. Captain Carter walked to the front, scanning rooftops and shattered windows, unaware that a German sniper who moments ago had him in perfect aim now knelt trembling above with his world collapsing in ways no bullet ever could. Matthias remained frozen beside the broken floorboards. His breath emerged in uneven bursts. Beneath him, Elise stirred again, shifting under pieces of splintered timber. She was barely conscious, yet the mere sound of her voice had cut through every layer of ice he had built around himself during the long, unforgiving months of war. He looked from her pale face to the road where the Americans edged closer. Their movements were careful, professional, shaped by months of brutal winter fighting. Carter raised a fist to halt the group as they checked an alley filled with rubble. In that muted halt, Matthias saw something he had never expected from an enemy officer. Caution, yes. Authority, certainly. But there was also a steady patience that reminded him of the way a man protects those under his care. It was not the bearing of a destroyer. It was the bearing of someone who had carried a frightened young girl to safety and treasured her photograph ever since. Matthias felt his heart pull in two directions. Duty sharpened one edge like a blade. Family crushed the other with something far heavier than steel. The two forces met inside him with an intensity that shook him more than any shelling or rifle burst he had known. His rifle remained within reach, its cold metal gleaming faintly. One shot could still end everything. One shot could protect Elise from discovery if the Americans interpreted her presence as enemy involvement. One shot could silence the questions rising inside him that he was not ready to face. Yet one shot would kill the man who had saved her life. The barn groaned again. Snow fell through the gaps in the roof and settled on Matthias's shoulders, but he barely felt it. His focus drifted from Carter to Elise. Her breathing came in shallow waves. The movement of her chest was fragile, faint. If the Americans passed by without noticing, she might not survive long enough for him to free her. Her body was pinned beneath beams too heavy to lift alone. He ran a hand across his face and forced his mind to steady. He listened to the rhythm of the patrol outside. Their voices were low, carried through layers of cloth wrapped against the cold. The sound of their steps shifted as they checked the far side of the barn. Time was shrinking around him like a tightening rope. He glanced toward the broken entrance of the barn. The Americans would reach that doorway within minutes. If they saw him holding a rifle, there would be no hesitation in their response. If they found Elise alone, buried in rubble, they might mistake her for a threat. If he remained silent, she could die before help arrived. Every path forward held danger. Every choice carried consequence. He looked through the gap in the boards again. Elise's eyes fluttered open. She did not speak this time. She simply looked toward the road, toward the direction of the American patrol. Even through her pain, her gaze held that same pleading softness she used to have when she convinced him to fix her favorite music box or help her reach a high shelf. She trusted the Americans. She trusted the man he almost killed. Matthias leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. He let the sounds of the valley fill his awareness. Snow striking wood, the slow grinding of tank tracks in the distance, the soft drip of melted frost falling from the beams, and the steady approach of American soldiers who had no idea how close they were to a fallen girl and a torn brother. He opened his eyes with a clarity he had not felt since before Dresden burned. He knew what he had to do, though it carried a weight that made his breath tighten. He moved away from the sniper nest, crawling slowly across the rafters to the far edge where he could climb down without drawing immediate attention. Every movement was careful. His coat brushed the old wood softly. His boots touched down in a silent drift of snow inside the barn. Once on the ground floor, he stepped through the broken stalls and debris until he reached Elise. She was shivering despite her worn coat. He tried lifting one of the beams that pinned her leg, but the frozen would refuse to budge. The sound of the effort echoed faintly through the barn. He froze, listening for any reaction from the patrol outside. None yet. He tried again, bracing his boots in the rubble and pushing with everything the winter had not already taken from him. The beam shifted only slightly, enough to draw a weak gasp from Elise, but not enough to free her. Matthias buried his face against his sleeve for a brief second. He could not do this alone. The patrol voices returned, closer this time. English words drifted through gaps in the barn walls. They were discussing the footprints near the entrance. One of the soldiers suggested clearing the barn next. Matthias's pulse quickened. He knelt closer to Elise. Her hand moved, brushing his coat as if urging him not to run. He looked toward the doorway. Shadows grew longer as the patrol drew nearer. He could see the outline of helmets just beyond the shattered frame. There was no more time for hesitation. If he revealed himself suddenly, the patrol might fire without a second thought. If he stayed hidden, they might search the barn and find him crouched beside her, rifle at his side. There was only one chance, one fragile thread of hope, and it demanded that he step out into the open in a way that invited risk from every angle. He rose slowly, moving toward the entrance. His limbs trembled from cold and fear, and something deeper that had taken root in him since seeing the photograph. The barn door hung crookedly. Snow blew in through the gap like drifting smoke. Matthias reached the edge of the shadows, where one more step would place him in clear view of the Americans. He hesitated, breath shaking. Then, with a quiet steadiness he did not know he still possessed, he stepped out. Carter turned instantly. The nearest soldier swung his rifle upward. Matthias raised his hand slowly, palms open, empty. The patrol froze in a stillness sharpened by instinct and caution. Carter's gaze locked on Matthias, his breath fogging in the bitter air. Neither man moved. Neither spoke. The wind filled the silence from. Matthias stood exposed in the snow, coat-torn, boots caked in dust and cold. The weight of the last few minutes pressed invisibly on his shoulders. He waited, every muscle tense, every heartbeat loud in his ears. From inside the barn, a soft cry rose. It was barely more than a whisper, yet it carried beyond the broken doorway like a fragile ribbon of sound. Carter heard it. His eyes flicked toward the barn, then back to Matthias. Another cry followed, a sound of pain and exhaustion, the kind of sound that no soldier, no matter the uniform, could ignore. Carter gestured sharply to his men. They prepared to advance, but he motioned for them to hold. Slowly, he took a step forward toward Matthias. His posture remained guarded. His rifle stayed lowered, but ready. His gaze searched Matthias's face for any sign of deception or threat. Matthias held his ground. The photograph burned in his memory. Elise's pleas echoed in his mind. He said nothing, waiting for Carter to decide what happened next. The snow thickened, falling in quiet sheets that dimmed the daylight. The world seemed to shrink to the space between these two men. One had nearly killed the other. One had saved the life of the other's sister. Both stood on the threshold of a decision that could determine not only their fates, but the fate of the girl buried beneath the rubble. Carter took another step. Matthias breathed out slowly. The moment that followed would shape everything that came after. But what unfolded next was not driven by orders or uniforms. It was shaped by something far older than war. A simple human recognition that reached across the divide. The true turning point was only beginning. The falling snow thickened to a white curtain, blurring the outlines of broken houses and softening the sharp edges of the ruined village. Captain Carter stood only a few strides away from Matthias now, watching him with a mixture of caution and calculation. The American officer had seen hundreds of Germans surrender, flee, or fight to the last breath, but none had stepped forward with this kind of fragile urgency. A quiet desperation buried beneath the stillness. Behind Matthias, the faint cry rose again from inside the barn. Carter's gaze flicked toward the source. Something in the tone of the sound pulled at him. It was not the alert cry of a soldier. It carried no threat. It was the small, trembling call of someone broken, frightened, and alone. Carter raised his hand in a silent order to his men. They spread out, weapons ready, circling carefully around the doorway without entering. Their breaths plumed in the cold air, their movements slow and controlled. Matthias lowered his hands slightly, not in defiance, but in a simple, wordless plea. He stepped aside from the barn entrance, leaving a clear path inside. Carter met his eyes. For a long moment, neither officer nor sniper moved. Snow drifted between them, as if marking a fragile boundary that neither wanted to cross, yet both knew would be crossed in moments. Then Carter stepped forward. He entered the barn cautiously, rifle lowered, yet angled enough to react if needed. His boots crunched against debris scattered across the frozen ground. Each step echoed faintly under the sagging roof beams. His breath rose in thin clouds as he scanned the interior. Then he saw her. Elise lay half-buried under a collapsed section of the upper floor. Pale hair dusted with snow, face streaked with soot. Her eyes blinked weakly in the dim light as Carter approached. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse, then carefully examined the beam, pinning her leg. The other American soldiers entered, moving with surprising gentleness. They had seen countless wounded before, friend and foe alike. Their hardened expressions softened as they took in the sight of the frail girl lying beneath the rubble. Carter looked back at Matthias, who stood just inside the doorway, hands still raised but trembling from cold and fear. The American officer studied him, searching for deception, a hidden weapon, any reason to believe this was a trap. But there was none, only desperation, only a brother's silent plea. Carter nodded once, a small gesture that carried the weight of a fragile trust. He signaled two soldiers to help move the beam, while another prepared bandages. They worked quickly but with care. The wood shifted slowly, groaning under the strain. When the beam finally rose high enough, Carter reached beneath and lifted Elise's body free with the practiced steady hands of a man who had carried wounded soldiers across battlefields. A faint, pained gasp escaped her lips. Matthias clenched his eyes shut, the sound striking him deeper than any rifle report. He lowered his hands fully now, stepping forward a few inches, unable to remain apart from her suffering any longer. Carter held Elise close, wrapping her in a wool blanket from his pack. Her eyes fluttered open. For an instant, she saw only Carter, the officer who had saved her before. Then her gaze drifted past him, landing on Matthias. Her lips trembled. Matthias took another step. Elise's weak smile flickered like a dying candle flame. Carter watched the reunion in silence. He saw the recognition between them, the bond that no battlefield could sever. Understanding settled quietly across his features. For the first time, he saw the German sniper not as an enemy, but as a man with something left to protect. He nodded once more to his men. No one raised a weapon. No one gave an order to fire. The war outside still raged, but inside the ruined barn, a different kind of truce had taken shape. The soldiers wrapped Elise in more blankets and prepared a makeshift stretcher. Carter oversaw every detail, ensuring her leg was stabilized and her breathing steady. Matthias hovered nearby, too afraid to move closer, too unwilling to step away. He felt each second stretch into eternity, filled with the unbearable tension of hope and doubt interlocked. As they prepared to carry Elise out of the barn, one of the American soldiers paused and looked toward Matthias with a puzzled expression. He glanced at Carter, waiting for direction. The danger was clear. Any decision involving an enemy combatant carried risk. But Carter made his choice without fear or hesitation. He gave a quiet order that surprised even his own men. Matthias was to walk beside them, not as a prisoner, not as a threat, but as someone who had a right to stay near his sister. As they moved slowly into the snowy street, the ruined village appeared strangely transformed. The cold no longer seemed as sharp. The silence no longer seemed as empty. The crunch of their boots on the ice became the only sound, steady and measured. The stretcher swayed gently between the soldiers, carrying it. Matthias walked close, eyes fixed on Elise. Her hand reached out from beneath the blanket. He caught it gently, his gloved fingers curling around hers. The warmth he felt was faint, but it traveled through him like a pulse of life after months of numbness. Carter walked on the other side, watching the siblings with quiet resolve. He had lost family of his own during the war, brothers in uniform, friends in battle. He recognized the fragility of moments like this, the kind that appeared only briefly between the cracks of history. But the moment was fragile. War pressed in from every direction. Gunfire echoed faintly somewhere beyond the town. And though this small human crossing had formed between them, the world beyond still held danger, suspicion, and choices with consequences that none of them could fully predict. When they reached the center of the village, Carter signaled for the group to stop beside the half-collapsed stone fountain. They rested the stretcher on a snow-covered platform. Elise breathed slowly, fighting to stay awake. Carter checked her pulse again, tightening the blanket around her shoulders. He looked at Matthias. They exchanged a silent understanding. Matthias wanted to thank him, but words failed. The war had taken many things from him. The ability to speak freely was one of them. He simply nodded, a small but deeply honest gesture. The wind rose, carrying distant artillery again. It reminded them that time was running short. Carter studied Matthias with a thoughtful expression. He seemed on the edge of a decision, the kind that could alter the fate of a single man or erase him from the war entirely. Matthias braced himself, ready for anything, unsure whether the fragile peace between them would hold. Then Carter reached into his coat. For a chilling moment, Matthias feared he had misread everything. But Carter did not pull a weapon. He pulled the photograph, the one featuring Elise. He extended it toward Matthias, holding it between two gloved fingers. Snowflakes landed on the glossy surface. Matthias accepted it with shaking hands. He stared at Elise's smiling face in the image. The necklace glinted in the faded light, the engraving he had carved still visible along the edge. Memories flickered inside him like sparks from a cold fire. The innocence of Dresden before the sirens. The laughter at the dinner table. The argument they had over her stubborn refusal to leave the city. The last glimpse of her climbing onto the train. He wiped away a tear that froze instantly on his cheek. Carter looked at him with something close to compassion. Then the distant sound of engines rolled like thunder. American trucks. Reinforcements approaching the village. Carter stiffened. His men exchanged sharp looks. If more American units arrived and found a German sniper walking freely beside them, questions would be asked, and not all answers would be believed. Suspicion could turn the fragile moment into a spark of violence. Matthias saw it too. He looked toward the road leading out of Hohenfeld. The snowfall blurred everything beyond 100 meters. It was impossible to tell how many vehicles were approaching. He turned back to Elise, then to Carter. The unspoken question hung in the icy air. What now? Carter glanced at his men. They waited for his command. The options were few. Protecting Elise was one thing. Explaining Matthias's presence to other units was another entirely. The line between compassion and protocol was razor thin. Carter lifted his hand in a gesture that told Matthias to stay close and remain silent. But Matthias hesitated. He understood the risk his presence posed for everyone, including Elise. Another rumble echoed through the valley. Engines drew closer. Snow swirled in thicker sheets. The world began to blur into indistinct shapes and muffled sound. Carter turned back to Matthias, and for a moment the two men stood as still as the statues the town once held in its square. Their next choices would shape everything that followed. The war outside continued, indifferent to their fragile connection. In that white frozen silence, Matthias looked down at the photograph and then up at Elise, lying on the stretcher, still breathing but fading. He took a slow breath. Then he made the decision that history would never record. The trucks drew closer. Voices echoed. Figures began to emerge from the swirling storm. Matthias stepped back, one pace, then another. He looked at Carter one last time. A silent thank you passed between them, the kind that depended on trust, sacrifice, and an understanding that transcended the uniforms they wore. The snow swallowed Matthias's figure as he stepped deeper into the ruins, choosing a path that would remain hidden from official accounts and forgotten by most. Carter watched him disappear, knowing that one life saved, one bond formed in the ruins of war, was something no rifle or uniform could erase. Behind him, Elise's breathing steadied slightly as the soldiers prepared to carry her toward safety. In the distance, the rumble of trucks filled the valley, drawing nearer. The moment was over, but the story was not finished. Some said Matthias escaped. Others claimed he reappeared after the war. A few believed he stayed hidden in the valley until the fighting ended. No official record confirmed any of it. But one thing remained certain. The photograph found its way into a family album in St. Louis years later, and someone had written 2 words on the back of it. 2 simple words that preserved a truth no archive ever recorded. For her. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who loves forgotten World War II history. Your support helps keep rare stories like this alive. Do not forget to like this video, drop a comment, and tell me exactly where in the world you are watching from. I read every single comment myself. And if you want more powerful World War II stories that history tried to forget, subscribe right now to WWII Never Told German Files. Your support encourages us to bring you more untold moments, more hidden human stories, and more truths buried in the shadows of the war. Thank you for watching and being part of this growing family. Your voice matters here.